Hi. Hi, this is a foreigner living in the Philippines. Because of some of the comments and questions that we've had on some of our other videos, my wife and I make these videos and put them on YouTube, and we try to chronicle our lives in an open and honest way. I don't want to tell every single detail of my life or how we live, but certain questions come up and they seem reasonable, so we're trying to explain what I'm doing here. I would have thought that living an idyllic life was enough of an explanation. Why would anybody not want to live what I see as a stress-free life? We have our challenges, of course, but we live on about 7 or 8 hectares of land, which has been in my wife's family for about 50 years. Obviously, we don't pay rent in that formal way, but everything else we pay for. So we don't live free. We pay for food, we pay for gas, we pay for a truck, we have a motorcycle. Not luxuries, because up until a few months ago, before we built a road and a bridge, the house that we live in was inaccessible. When we arrived, it had only just been connected to power, but there was no running water. We used to fetch our water from a freshwater well, which was down a hill. Believe me, that was no paradise activity, fetching that water every day. Every day people use a great deal of water. You don't realize how much when it's coming out of a faucet. Right? But the main thought behind this video was to try to explain how it could be that I would be here living this kind of life, because the house that we've now built, I built myself. I built that single-handed because we couldn't afford to pay people to haul all of the materials up by hand. So what we did was we built it in metal stud, which is possible to bring up on a sled dragged by a caravel for that last 2 miles up that road. So we were able to overcome the logistics of building a house so far up. Well, all of that said, and I'm happily living here with my wife, who is so much younger than me, as everybody notices. That's unavoidable. And here I am in the Philippines. So how did I get here? Well, I left school when I was 15. My parents were very poor, working class in the UK, in Manchester, in Lancashire. And the first job that I had really was training to be a coal miner in the Robin Hood pit, which is just outside Manchester. I think through Salford, I think it's Worsley. But anyway, I trained for that, and actually had been accepted. I'd applied for a job in the Bradford pit, and I was trained to do a job down the coal mines. At 15, I was trained to do a job on haulage. That's connecting all of the tubs of coal that come up from the coal face, ready to go into the cage, which would take it to the surface. And that was to have been my life. Fortunately, my father, unbeknownst to me, saw an ad in the paper from the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders military band, and he knew that I loved music, and he wrote to the bandmaster of that band and asked if they would accept me, which they, of course, they did, because it doesn't take much to get into the British Army. Anyway, I went and did the tests, and then I was accepted, and my acceptance came the day before I was due, well, the weekend before I was due to start work on haulage at the Bradford pit, which was to have been my future. Well, I didn't show up at Bradford pit, and instead I showed myself up at the recruiting centre, and they gave me a ticket for Stirling in Scotland, and in a few days I was on my way. That was when I was only just 15. So by my 16th birthday I was serving in the band with the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders in Berlin in Germany at 16 years old. That was my birthday. So I served 8.5 years in the army and was classically trained as a musician, as a trombone player. Well, when I left the army, I went to live in London. I had a very checkered career when I was in the army because I was an extremely rebellious kind. Didn't take kindly to being told what to do all the time. And after a year, after a year of being in the army, I realized that I was never going to be happy in it. So the next 7.5 years were tough. Well, I left the army and I went to work in London as a musician. So I turned professional musician, and that's how I earned my living for something like 25 years. Once I came into a situation where I really wanted to travel more and to experience more, then that became the focus of my life. I'd married and divorced, and that was something of an unhappy mess. I was never very good at being married. My greater skill was in being divorced. So I'm the first to admit that I've made many mistakes in that area. Eventually, on the breakup of my marriage, I made it out to America, and I went to live in America with my son Luke, one of my children, Luke. And we stayed there from 1992 up until about just over 3 years ago, when I came out to the Philippines. So I've had a very varied life during all of that time. I've been a builder, I've been a building contractor. When I got to, here's an ironic thing for you, how life can suddenly give you what seems like an opportunity with one hand and take it away with the other. I'd always dreamed as a musician of going to America, because that was where all of the idols for me were in America. My dream at that time was to play in the Stan Kenton band on trombone, and my God, I would have given anything for that. Here's the irony. In order to be able to afford to come to America with my son, I had to sell the only thing that I had of value, which was my trombone. Once I got to America, I realized that I was a single parent with a child, and I didn't feel that I was willing to let someone else put my son to bed every night, and then that I would have to go and wake him up and take him out, and that's if I worked as a musician. So what I did was I did other jobs, and my skill in carpentry, which had always been something that I was pretty good at, came to the rescue. And I did various jobs, putting in closets, and then finally I started to actually work for myself. I worked for myself for quite a time, and then I had an accident and I broke my leg, and that was when things got really rough. There I was at home with a broken leg and a cast, and it was my right leg, if I remember rightly, so I couldn't drive. Quickly they repossessed my truck, and things were going pretty good. But I saw an ad in a local hobby shop for a company called Icons Internet. I think it was called Icons Replicas, and that proved to be a turning point for me, even though the company itself was in trouble and eventually went under. I met a lot of people in there, wonderful, talented people who were artists and what are sometimes called artisans. skilled people who are earning a trade with, or working a trade with skills which are focused on art. So I remember that I stumped into that the offices of that company on crutches with my portfolio over my shoulder. And I showed them my photographs, and the man that interviewed me was one of the heads of the department for hiring, and promised that he would get back to me. And I think after a week I hadn't heard, so I thought, well, they obviously don't want somebody on crutches working for them in the woodshop. But then I was told by phone that I should come in. I went in and I spoke to the man who owned the company, who later became a friend, James Latter, and he said, you can come now, you can work in any capacity you want, but I would want you to be head of the woodshop. And I was to open a woodshop that I would be allowed to hire the people that I wanted. So I immediately hired my best friend, Elcio Cancelia, who is a Brazilian with an amazing story of his own. And we went to work there. Well, I learned a lot. I wish I had paid more attention and I would have learned a lot more, but that's one of the lessons of life, isn't it? So from there, when that company actually got into severe difficulties and left the building and facility that we were at, I managed to negotiate with the owner of the property if I could have a small part of it as a workshop studio, which he did, and he gave that to me at a very, very reasonable price, so that I could actually start doing work for myself. And I did some work for a company called Modern Props, and Modern Props is still open and is the premier movie prop rental company in Hollywood. If anybody makes a movie, they need all of the props for that, even if they're filming a scene in a simple ordinary house. They need knives, forks, tables, plates, and they go and they can rent from this company, and I got a contract from them for making what it eventually turned out to be, I think, 11 consoles, and then I made another contract for them as well. Right about that time I moved to Florida, and that started a whole new episode in my life. Well, after being in Florida for a while, that was no picnic either. It didn't turn out that America was so kind to me in many ways, and yet I learned a great deal. I reached a very low point where I married again and divorced again, and that was right about the time that the real estate market took a plunge. Everything went out the bottom. In one fell swoop over a period, I lost my marriage, I lost my house, I was bankrupt. When I was doing well, I had 4 cars, I had a nice house in a nice area, and plenty of work, and all of that just disappeared. So after being bankrupt, I actually squatted a house that was under foreclosure, and the people that were in that area were quite happy, I think, especially the next door neighbours, were quite happy for me to live in that house along with a friend, because we kept the house up. It didn't become a slum over the years that it would have been empty, so that worked out for everybody. I left from there, and I decided that I just had to do something that was going to take me away from all of this, everything being the same. So I sold my van, I bought a ticket for 2 months' time for the Philippines. And I made it out to meet my son from a former marriage. And I went out there and I spent a few months bonding with him, and I had a great time. And then I realized that he had a life to get on with, and so I'd better do the same. And coincidentally, that was about the time that I met Beth. And if you've been following the videos, you know that I married a lovely woman. We are very happy, and it's not really hard to understand why I could come from all of that as a musician. Remember that as a musician I did some great work. I worked for several really great bands in the UK, famous in the UK as working bands, top 40. I was a lead vocalist and trombone player. I did television. I did. I worked in Buckingham Palace for Prince Charles' birthday. I saw the Queen of England. For as strange an experience that was. and I worked in many places in Europe. I was flown for one gig by an Arab royal family along with one of the bands that I was in, and we went out and did one gig in, I think, the Arab Emirates. So I had a good time. I worked all of the great clubs, all of the great hotels. So what other people might think of as great things to do, I'd already done. I'd done that. I'd been a musician. I'd been successful. I was a good musician. I enjoyed a good life. I bought houses. I sold. I had cars. I had a good life. I toured all over the United Kingdom, and I've also been all over Europe. I've been to Africa, Pakistan. I've been to Australia. I've been all over China. I've done a lot of traveling that other people might think that if they settled for a life that I have, they would be missing all of that. I'm not missing any of it. My issue now for travel will be that I would like to be producing enough income that I can show my wife Beth the world. Plus, one of the questions that comes up that people really want to have answered is whether at my advancing age I'm interested in having a child. Well, Beth and I are very interested in having a child, and right now we've got a fisherman So that's a local fisherman who came up and a little while ago tried to sell us some crap for an exorbitant price, obviously an American price, because anybody who's white in the Philippines must be American, which of course I'm not. So where was I? Travel and my wife is 27. And my official age is I'm 28, and I say that because nothing is more boring than continually talking about age and how this is going to affect me and that's going to affect me. Here's how I see age. If you see yourself as being at the end of the road, guess where you are? You're at the end of the road. A friend of mine a long time ago told me that how you view your life is the way that it will unfold. So if you think of your life in the early years, you think about living. When I was 25, the idea of being even 45 seemed a million years away. And then when I was 35, the idea of 50 seemed like a million years away. So this is how I think that people should look at their lifespan. If you go along with the basic consideration and agreement of society, you will think in terms of being 75 as being a good life. Well, I think slightly differently on that, because no matter what my age is, I've always imagined that road that I saw when I was 25. I saw my life as a straight road, going straight off into infinity without end. I thought that way. It must have been the right thing to do, because I've outlived all of my family. My brother, my sister, my father, my mother. I'm older than any of them. My brother, walking along one day, just hit the ground, and as he hit the ground, he was dead. And he was barely 50, I don't know, maybe 54. My sister, a little older. But whatever it was that they visualized their life, that hasn't happened to me. I've never done street drugs. I've never been a smoker. Not really much of a drinker. In fact, apart from my early years when I was in the army, where I did it because the next day we would talk about how drunk we were, as if it was some great thing. But that didn't last long, and I quit. I soon quit that, and I never went into it when I was in the music business, which made me a very lonely man, because in the music business, drinking is the common ground, even more so than, say, playing golf is for people who are in business. So my long and winding road is the life that I choose, to see as being for me. Will that happen? Will I live this incredible long life? Who knows? Will the math that people seem to automatically start working out for me and my wife? Well, she's this old and you're that old? Well, what will happen when you die and she's left alone? Now, if you know when you're going to die, you know a lot more and are in much better contact with the Creator, who holds the plan for all of us, than I am. So, my advice, if anybody's interested, is to look far into the distance, wherever you are in your life, at whatever stage you are in your life, at whatever age you are. Don't start thinking, I can't do that at my age. I had this brought home very well once. I was in my early 20s, and I was working a club called the Eve Club on Regent Street in London. And I'm sitting next to a very accomplished trumpet player. He had been offered all of the arranging work for a well-known band, Edmondo Ross, who had the club next door to the Eve Club. Edmondo Ross was a big name on television right at that time, and this would have been a heck of an opportunity for him. And I said, this is great. When do you start? He said, I can't do that. I'm too old for that. He was 33 years old. And I thought then, I'm never going to let age be something that stops me from doing it. So right now, am I living in paradise? Pretty close. Someone said on one of our comments, someone said, you are close to being almost too good to be true. And maybe that is correct. Maybe everything that I have is too good to be true. But I don't think so. We do not have everything. We have our money problems, believe it or not. Sometimes we reach a state called no money. And that's something we've covered in one of our other videos about the Filipina and the money. Filipinos have a different way of looking at money, and they have a different way of looking at no money. So I've learned a great number of things. I've learned how to live with very little and yet still be happy. I've learned that life is not all about me. It's not all about any one of us. And one of the things that we all need to recognize is this particular point, that it's not about all of us. I never knew this. I've only recently had this brought home to me. So if anybody's out there saying, well, you didn't always think like that, and that's not the one that I knew, that's not the Terence that I knew, well, you're right. I admit that. But I've learned that lesson now, and I've learned that lesson of helping those that I can. Someone asked me, do you really have a family that doesn't keep asking? And the answer is truly yes. When someone in my extended family comes and asks me for something, I think very carefully before I say no, because as my wife said, she knows how difficult it is for them to ask. Now, when someone asks for money now, if we can help, we will. It's as simple as that. If we can help, we will. You can't be something that you're not, and I'm not a rich man. And you can't give what you don't have, and I don't have a great deal of money to give. So I don't need to be in that situation of saying no, but meaning, no, I don't want to. Now, for those people who are in the situation where they're married to a Filipina and the family is on the ask for money and think that they now have an ATM machine in their family with the foreigner, well, here's my advice to you. Stand every day in front of the bathroom mirror and practice saying no. And that's how you handle it. No. That's outside of our budget. But don't always say no. Think about the need of that other person. And if they're asking for 1,000 pesos, then try to give them 200 or 300 or 400. Don't say an absolute flat no that sends that person away in despair, because believe me, they will have thought very hard before they come to you if in the past you have been able to say no. So that's the one thing there that is usually a big question. How do you handle the being able to say no if you're asked for money? Well, good luck on that. It's not an easy one. It's a real challenge. That's pretty well everything right up to here. You know, do I tell everything? No. Do I want everyone to know everything? No. And I'm much more open about things than my wife, who knows the bad side of, what can we say, of gossip, and how people will take something, especially in the Philippines where gossip is something of an art form, it's a pastime, and they will take something that you said and they will make it bigger. So she tends to think in terms of, let's keep things to ourselves. Even though since we started doing these videos, she has been extremely open and surprised many foreigners who are married to a Filipina who will not divulge anything about their personal life. Well, we're trying to chronicle an open, honest view of what ordinary life is in the Philippines, and you cannot do that by only doing what I call the travelogue type of video. We try to keep our videos real so that you're actually seeing the way that life is. Life is not all about how easy things are. But then, if you have come from the West, or if you're about to come from the West, don't expect things going to be the same. They're not going to be the same. But then, would you want them the same? Do you want to have fled from one life where the dollar or the pound is or the Deutschmark, whatever, is the almighty God? Do you want to have that here? Well, you can't have everything. You can't have it all. So decide how you want to live. Decide whether you can take a simple life. Someone asked me, could I live on $1,500 a month? And I would say that if you came and you lived high in the hills like we do, you would be able to live very well on $1,500. Of course, as you start to buy things like washing machines and refrigerators and motorcycles, which you'll need if you're living in the hills, and possibly a truck like we have, then yeah, you'll have to think twice about how you budget things, but you would be able to live reasonably well. We live on less than that. We live on a lot less than that, but we live modestly. But we pay for everything. My mother-in-law has medical issues, and we pay for her. And all of those are loaded onto our monthly budget. Here's the funny thing: if you have $100 to spend, whatever you have need of will come up to $99 or $101. That's just a fact of life. Budgeting, what's the saying? If you have $100 and you budget 99, then that's happiness. If you budget $101 for the 100 that you have, then that's trouble. So you need to look at how you're going to live, whether you can cope and work your way around the simplicity of the life that you're choosing. Then you'll come and make a success of it, and you'll do it on a fraction of the money that it would take to live anything like that. How could I live in this kind of climate on 7 or 8 hectares of land with almost no houses even in sight of where we are, on a modest budget? I couldn't do it. Well, my wife is miming the words low bat, so I'm taking it that she doesn't mean that she herself is on low bat, but that means that our camera is tired of watching me. And so this is the end of my talk about how, if anybody has been interested, what kind of life led me to this place here. Is it too good to be true? No, it's not. What we are showing you is what is. What you see is what you get. So, I'll say goodbye for now. This is a foreigner living happily in the Philippines, and we'll hope that you will like, comment, subscribe, share. If you think this is of any value to anybody else considering living out in another country where the economy will allow them greater latitude and luxury or happiness than they are having wherever they're living right now, be it in the heart of London or LA or, heaven forbid, in New York City. They'll be able to come to a place like this with their Filipino wife, or find a lovely Filipino woman who will care for them and love them in the way that my own wife, Beth, does for me. So like, comment, subscribe, and we look forward to seeing you on one of our other videos. Bye for now. A foreigner living happily in the Philippines.